Thanks, Richard. He's also told me he has not seen The Godfather nor Deliverance, so I don't know how much of a movie buff he really is, but we can talk about it afterwards. It's my privilege today to not only be a sponsor at this event, which is very important to us at Hydrostor, but also to introduce Mr. Timothy Simon, who, as a former commissioner at the CPUC, truly embodies what Lorelei was sort of driving at the beginning of moving beyond the energy default and trying to bring some of that thinking to Sacramento. So we're really pleased to have him here today. Tim is currently the founder and principal of Taz Strategies, so they're providing legal and policy consulting services. Back in 2008, former Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger appointed Tim as a commissioner of the CPUC. He's also served in leadership roles at UC Berkeley, NARUC, the Liquefied Natural Gas Partnership with NARUC and the US DOE, and was appointed to the National Petroleum Council. So I can't think of anyone who is better positioned to speak to the diversity of technologies that we need to continue to be the energy hub of the future. Currently, he's the vice chairman for the North American Energy Standards Board Advisory Council, and Tim earned his bachelor's degree in economics from the University of San Francisco and a Juris Doctor from the University of California, Hastings College of Law. So not only does he have all that experience and background, but he's also an attorney and economist, perfect balance. And with that, let me welcome Mr. Timothy Simon to the stage. And thank you for your time.
Thank you for that very kind and generous introduction. Even if I did write it, it was articulated in a way that I would have if I had the same verbal capabilities. I want to thank the many people that I've worked with up and until this time to be a part of this very important summit, particularly Christine and Kent Holly of Cornerstone, of course, Richard Chapman, and numerous others who have been a part of putting together this very impressive, very informative, very impactful symposium. And congratulations on 17 years of bringing energy, of bringing energy reality and energy intelligence to the community. That is so hard to find today. You wouldn't think that would be one of the rare resources or commodities that we would have, that being an intelligent, articulated energy policy that embraces all of the amazing resources that Kern County is blessed with. And the more I study this county, the more I have fallen in love with it. But I must say, you only have one direct flight to San Francisco a day on United, and I'm attending APEC this evening, so as much as I'd love to stick around after my remarks, if I miss that flight, and my companion and the love of my life sits on the San Francisco Port Commission, but if I miss that flight, I will be a resident of Bakersfield, so I want to make certain that I had such a great time last night at Luigi's. I believe Arrow was the sponsor. Good God, I'm so glad that all I had to do was take an elevator down to this room, because otherwise there may have been, Houston, we have a problem, right? But I just had such a wonderful time, and while I was there, I'm on the SF Jazz board in San Francisco, and I really love that art form. And I was thinking about Lou Rawls' song called Groovy People, where he says he just likes groovy people. You know, he's just a good old country boy, and he likes being around groovy people. And that's the way I feel when I'm in Bakersfield. And this isn't my first time at this rodeo, because I was the guest speaker at an officer installation and gala with the Kern County Black Chamber of Commerce. And I think this was about maybe 8 or 9 years ago, maybe a little longer. And I had that same feeling. And what you have here is a collaborative effort in business, and particularly in energy. And I'm telling you, this is not common in other parts of the state. And I hope to talk about that some in my remarks. But I also, my mother's from Tulsa, Oklahoma. She was born and raised on Greenwood, where the tragic, as you know, that economic engine in America that suffered the tragedy of a riot and a massacre. My father's from Lake Charles, Louisiana. They were part of the Great Migration. My father was discharged out of Port Chicago, right there in Contra Costa County, which is now Concord. As some of you may recall, it was also the source of a tragedy, a munitions explosion. My father, who's a veteran, and I know we're on the tail of Veterans Day, so let's take a moment and honor the women and men who've served our nation in your service. It was mentioned that I served in the National Petroleum Council. President Harry Truman created the NPC specifically for the defense effort, because in World War I and World War II, fuel source became a real critical component for the Allied forces. Hence, today, here we are again. And this energy that we're talking about is touching the lives of Americans and people around the world more than any policy issue, and I'm going to include healthcare there, because it's important to us to understand that the decisions we make here in Kern County, the decisions that are made in Sacramento, California Public Utilities Commission is actually in San Francisco, as many of you know, but the decisions that are made in San Francisco impact us and the world. I remember Governor David Patterson saying to me at an event, he said, Timothy, I tell my public service commissioners to watch California, but don't do everything they do until you talk to me. But we're the Marines. We hit the beachhead in terms of our policies, in terms of our brave capabilities to do bold things, but at the same time, we also suffer the casualties that are associated with those policies. Hence, it is extremely important that you have dialogues like we have today so that there can be an honest deliberation about the reality of energy. And I'd be remiss if I didn't take a moment to thank the team here at the Marriott for the great work they've done today in serving these tables and making sure the audio system is sound, all of those things that we sometimes take for granted. I want to thank you for your great service as well, because that's very important. I hate slides, but as it turns out, when you're batting cleanup, a lot of the things that I was going to discuss have already been covered, but I will try to have some audibles here so that I don't overlap too far into what other people talked about. And part of that is my background. I was very honored when Governor Schwarzenegger asked me at the time. I was the first African-American appointment secretary, and still the only African-American appointment secretary in the history of California. But when the governor said to me, and people, look, I love Governor Schwarzenegger. We're having a reunion in Sacramento, actually on Friday, with the Schwarzenegger administration. I can't wait to see him. And I have been asked 3 times to come to the CPUC, but let me tell you, being an appointment secretary of Governor Schwarzenegger is a lot of fun. I met every major film star, in America, and then he's such a fascinating man and such a brilliant visionary, and so I really didn't want to go to the CPUC. I knew that was a landmine, if you know what I'm saying. I see someone laughing there. But, and I told my boss and chief of staff, Susan Kennedy, I said, if the governor wants me to go back to San Francisco to the CPUC, I want to hear from him. And I'm having lunch with the chair of the Latino caucus and one of our appointees, and we're discussing workforce housing. And I get this call, and it's the governor's assistant, and he said, the governor wants to speak to you. And so there's a pregnant pause. Of course, I had to tell everybody at the table that this is the governor, okay? And I get this call, and he goes, Timothy, I have all this green energy and this broadband, and I need someone I can trust. You're going to the CPUC. Thank you very much. And that was it. By the time I got back to my office, trying to figure out what am I going to do, the press release was already out that I was going to the CPUC, and that press release included the announcement of my replacement. So clearly, This was in place long before, but it did give me an opportunity to work with the California legislature, with the various agencies and departments. There are over 400 boards and commissions that the Appointments Office supplies the administrative and background support to. And it more or less gave me a, kind of a tour of duty on how California government works, because it works through the people that are elected and appointed. It's not magic. You get good people, you get good policies. You get not so good people, you have some issues, okay? And it's not easy, it is always complicated, but when the public understands the community's real needs, and that's what we're talking about in energy. Our energy demand is growing. When we're talking about the true energy needs, we would probably not find ourselves in the scenario where we're picking winners and losers. See, that's not the job of the CPUC commissioner. You pick the least cost, best fit. And let me recognize one of my colleagues. He was on a fellow commission, and he's here today, and that's Commissioner Jim Boyd from the California Energy Commission. Jim, you're looking great. Jim and I Commissioner Boyd and I worked closely together. We had a number of meetings involving transmission and other issues that are affecting California. And that cooperative level between state agencies is so important to achieve the people's work. But it's even more important that we have better connectivity with county governments and local governments and state officials. The CPUC oversees area codes of all things. And I got a call from a legislator who didn't realize that the area code in his district had been changed by the CPUC. And none of the county officials knew in advance that the area code was being changed. And that gave me an example as to why I had to go to that community, have a public participation hearing, and find a way to reverse that process and to change it. And that's the important role of many that the CPUC plays. I'm fortunate to be chairman of the Advisory Council of the North American Energy Standard Board. They set the contracts and the standards of much of what we're talking today. And one of those areas that is so critical to our nation and our area's energy future is the entry of new processes in the natural gas space, in the natural gas pipelines, how we're injecting those pipelines and how we're maintaining their safety, reducing that methane risk that comes from leakage. All these things we'll discuss more and more. And then I chair the Legislative Issues and Public Policy Committee of the American Association of Blacks in Energy, which I'm very proud to be on their board. And just so you know, we are fuel agnostic. We're fuel agnostic. Sounds like something you say at a religious discussion, right? But we understand that every fuel source is critical to the demand, the load in America. And more importantly, I understand, as you do, is as we begin to demonize or continue to demonize and attack the fossil world, let's not fool ourselves. The great American middle class was built on coal and fossil energy, cheap baseline coal and fossil energy. And for those today to try to demonize this business, which, by the way, exceeds diversity tables in its workforce, for politicians today and pension boards and others to divest. My city and county of San Francisco, so similar to Kern County, isn't it? But they voted to divest from fossil energy. And I so happened to be in the building on the day of the vote. And I saw the supervisor who advanced the energy, and he was pushing his bicycle through the hallway. He rode a bicycle to work, surprise, surprise. And I reminded him that the tires on his bicycle, the grips, the brakes, the seat, all came from the fossil industry. Its impact on being the fertilizer of the world, and particularly for regions like this that are the breadbasket, the food belt of the world, is so critical to our ability as a global economy to influence those nations that are still dealing with food depravity or lack of food access. So I had to remind this Board of Supervisor that, you know, it may sound pretty when you say divest. And by the way, the California employees were largely hurt by this in terms of the return that many of these companies are making. And I think one of the reasons that we're dealing with this, and I'll talk about this later, is the lack of energy education. And why we need to make it mandatory that our students not only take civics, not only take STEM, but begin to understand energy. Because if they understood energy, they wouldn't let, with the exception of Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, they wouldn't let movie stars tell them what should be the energy policies of California. I do also sit on a couple of company boards, and one is very active in this area. That's Emeritus. We're very strong in the dairy gas and renewable gas arena, as well as ethanol. We recently have drilled 2 carbon sequestration and storage wells, and we're located here in the northern portion of the Central Valley. And so our headquarters is in Cupertino, so I find myself in that area often. And then I served on the board of Chara Solutions, which was NYSC. We sold that company, but we remediated decommissioned coal plants, utilizing the fly ash and other byproducts to sell to the public. Very important in the area of concrete when we're talking about infrastructure growth. And the fascinating thing about Chara is that when we would remediate, whoops, I went the wrong way. When we would remediate a coal facility, many of them in the Ohio River and waterfront properties, the EPA guidelines for coal are so strict that we'd convert them into golf courses and resorts, okay? But I have to remind myself that the technology we're looking at, the flat screen TVs, our phones, the other critical sources that we utilize to have that capability. By the way, there's an iPad on here. My team put that there, but now I remember servers create more CO2 than the airline industry. So as we go on our phone and do that search and that demand, which we should be able to, I'm a big believer in the knowledge resource base, even though I'm concerned that our kids may not know the Congressional Library coding system, you know, the author and subject matter. Remember pulling those drawers out? It just breaks my heart that they don't have to go through that same torture that I did to find information. But it's very important that we understand that there's a price or a consequence for everything. So our desire to have energy on demand requires more scaling of energy resources. And that's very important. And you know, we had a great presentation today from SoCalGas, and I just left the National Association of Regulatory Utilities conference. I'm a commissioner emeritus. It was in La Quinta, California, and I was there with SoCalGas, and a dear friend and former colleague of mine from the Schwarzenegger administration, Dan Skopek, gave one of the best explanations of hydrogen and the rainbow of hydrogen colors and the challenges that we're going to have, and even referencing the real cost that Americans should be aware of, the need for greater transparency as we're talking about this energy transition. But I wanted to point out something that Dan and Neil and others could not, that Sempra is a global enterprise. It's the only global utility. We do have some global assets of utility affiliates in the state, but of the 3 major utilities, Sempra is the one that's run by a global holding company in San Diego, California. They have 2 liquefied natural gas facilities in the Texas Gulf, and one right down a little near Ensenada on our West Coast. And when I chaired that partnership, we had thought that there was a 50-year lifespan of our natural gas reserves. And then ironically, under the Obama administration and the Department of Energy, this amazing technology called horizontal hydraulic fracking changed the game. America became a global leader. We became the Saudi Arabia of natural gas, and a very strong injection into our ability to produce this great resource that we call petroleum. And thanks to companies like Sempra, when we look at the war in Ukraine, when we look at the tragedy surrounding Israel and Hamas in the Gaza, if we look at the various wars in North Africa, including the tragedy that's happening in the Congo and in Yemen, I guarantee you, they used to say, follow the money, follow the energy. Because each of those incidents, each of those tragedies, each of those families that we're going to lose, each of those future generations, trust me, somewhere in there, that conflict is energy ignited. And it's companies like Sempra, by their export of liquefied natural gas into the EU, into Asia, into other parts of the country that had a reliance on Russia and Vladimir Putin for his gas capabilities. It was John McCain that called Russia a gas station that acts like a country, okay? So we have to be able to support not just our domestic energy policies, which are really critical, but we have to support the Sempras and the Chevrons and the other companies that are making a difference in the world by giving communities the capability to build their middle class the same way that we did, right? Some of these countries that are dealing with famine, they may not be that excited about solar right now. They're trying to grow crops. They're trying, and I do believe in all of the above. But I think to have that all of the above discussion, you got to be honest about each energy resource. Otherwise, you're operating on an information deficit. And I think that's the challenge that we have in our country today. Decarbonization, electrification, and this pipeline. I promised Richard that I wouldn't try to isolate or attack any group. And I'm really going to try to stick to that promise. But I do want to say, as I begin to wind down this discussion, I know that there are communities in the region where their city councils have voted to end natural gas connections to residential and commercial businesses. And clearly, I try to trust and honor the three branches of government. But truth be told, these decisions are not being made by the citizens. They are typically being made by the legislative branch of these local governments. And if you, again, follow the energy, there's usually some climate action council that has made the decision that we're no longer going to provide this valuable resource to our citizens in greenfield housing. In the case of the city of Berkeley, with a deed transfer, you would have to cut off the natural gas connection to that home. By the way, there are ethnic implications. Many ethnicities actually prefer cooking over a fire, like our Asian population, and the usage of woks. Fortunately, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, of all folks, came with a decision that has stalled this process. And during this period, or during this stay, and by the way, just today, the mayor of Boston withdrew from an effort to ban natural gas connections in the city of Boston. I'm still not a Celtics fan, but be that as it may. But I'm hoping it's a chance to have dialogue about, and I'll get to that slide shortly, but about the implications of what happens when legislators make decisions on a local level that do not have the full input of the voting public. And that's what we're seeing in the natural gas bans. Now, 17 states have banned the banning of natural gas by local governments. We call it a ban the ban, right? But I think those are important moves because, and we'll talk about other aspects of it, but there's something that's being missed in the dialogue. There was the San Bruno explosion. Tragic. I was a commissioner at the time. Not only was I a commissioner, I chaired the gas committee for NARUC, and I was assigned commissioner on all natural gas proceedings in the state of California. And it hurt deep. One of our staff members and her daughter evaporated I walked on the grounds of that district in San Bruno shortly after it was safe, where it cooled down enough, and I saw people in white suits. And I'm saying to myself, well, that must be hazmat, because, you know, you have, in these buildings, you have all these toxic materials. No, it was the coroner. It was a coroner looking for body fragments. So that was a very dark time. And at that time, I became part of what was called the Call to Action National Pipeline Safety Committee under then Transportation Secretary Ray LaHood. And as a result of that, a number of measures were enacted to create greater pipeline safety. Automatic valves, the removing of cast iron, removing of certain PVC pipes in the distribution system that were brittle and subject to the kind of tragic explosion we had in Rancho Cordova under PG&E. That resulted in billions and billions and billions of dollars of investments that went across the country for what I believe were prudent and responsible reasons. Well, guess what? When you ban natural gas connections to residents, you're still paying for those stranded assets. That's the way the utility process works. It's not magic. What we call the LDC, or the local distribution company, comes to the CPUC expressing a desire to make an investment in capital. We call it CapEx, and there's an authorized, not guaranteed, by the way. I often see anti-folks say it's a guaranteed rate of return. No, it's not. It's an authorized rate of return. But as a result of that, billions and billions of dollars was invested in pipelines. And there's a term that's used in the common law, and I was a law professor for a number of years, the law abhors forfeiture. And what these groups are doing, no matter how well-intended they may be, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. No matter how well-intended they are forfeiting a private property right that hard-working families and businesses paid for. And in my personal opinion, by the way, I live in a city that banned, that banned natural gas. We tried, we really tried. They whooped us like we stole something. But just to kind of add on that, there was an LA Times piece, because I was on a panel with former legislator Rod Wright, and yes, thank you, and former Mayor and Speaker Willie Brown at the NAACP in Los Angeles. And by way of that panel, we also had a pediatric pulmonologist who spoke about the realities of where the asthma is coming from. It's not the gas appliances, and we'll get to that slide. It's the particulate that's coming from diesel, which SoCal Gas is doing such a great job to eliminate in some of their efforts to put forth compressed natural gas, hydrogen, and other cleaner fuel sources. But we had a unanimous resolution by the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People to oppose natural gas bans. And the LA Times wrote an article saying that the nation's oldest civil rights organization had been bought off. And that was an insult. Aren't these the folks who are supposed to be so racially conscious, so compassionate, so concerned about the well-being of people of color? But I'm telling you, this oil and gas industry, this fossil industry, has done more in improving communities. And again, I believe of all of the above. I drive a Tesla. I have solar on the top of my roof at home. But guess what? I chose it for a number of reasons. I chose it, and I'm proud to drive it. But at the same time, I mentioned Kim. She doesn't want to drive an electric vehicle. And I don't think that you'll see riots in the streets before she's forced to. And that's what America should be about, that ability to choose. Now, one of my issues surrounding the climate discussion is that we're always being admonished. Anytime I hear someone talk about this existential threat, which I believe in, I feel, I came up through Catholic schools. Remember how you hated to have to go to confession, And, I love my faith, don't get me wrong. And, bless me, Father, for I have sinned. Today I would need to bring like a backup drive, But I always feel like when we start talking about climate, it's about what we are not doing and what we need to do more of. Well, let me tell you something. As California has reduced CO2 by very effective measurable amounts, GDP has grown, both on a per capita and on an aggregate basis. So I think if the climatologists and the people that want to support more clean energy sources and reduce global warming, I think you need to start giving the public more credit for what they're doing and not always telling them what they're not. And especially when we talk about Sacramento. Let me talk about Sacramento for a minute. I'm up there all the time, so I got to be kind, okay? But I was on that team that created AB 32. I was the appointment secretary at the time. And it's bipartisan, by the way. At the passage, there was Mike Valines and Dick Ackerman, along with Fabian Nunez and Fran Pabli and others. It was a great moment for California and a great moment for the world. If any of you know the Global Solutions Warming Act, the goal or the baseline was 1990 levels of CO2. 1990 levels. I was a senior citizen in 1990, okay? That's around the time I got my ARP card, okay? What happened? Well, I'll tell you what happened. Part of it's term limits. Part of it's the fact that every legislature, every governor, and now every city council, and oftentimes even county boards and others, has to be greener than the last one. And your energy wonks. I don't have to walk through the different levels. When I left the commission, we had achieved 33% renewable standard, what's called the RPS. And by the way, there was a market price reference that matched that with the price of combined cycle natural gas generation. So when people talk about this high cost of hydrogen, the high cost of renewable natural gas, the high cost of infrastructure, just go back 15 years and you will know that the many power purchase agreements that I approved with my esteemed colleagues and the work that I did with Jim Boyd at the Energy Commission, we knew it was going to be sticker shock. But fortunately, the scalability of that resource has reduced the price shock as well as energy efficiency. So let me just point out a couple of things here. And this is from the California Air Resources Board. And we look at the sources of carbon in California. And I want to point your attention to the import and export of electricity. I don't have one of those laser things, but I think you can see it on the board, okay? Now, that, if my Jesuit math is correct, and I was a liberal arts student, that comes to 16% of our CO2 in the state comes from electric imports and exports. I'm not going to blame the electrons. By the way, some of those out-of-state electrons are coming from some coal generation. I'm just letting you know. Let's go to natural gas. The residential natural gas is 8% of our CO2, and commercial natural gas is 6% of our CO2, which takes us to 14%. Now, I guarantee you, if our state put its emphasis back on energy efficiency, EM&V, if they put our focus on those measurements, I guarantee you that great companies like SoCalGas and Pacific Gas and Electric could reduce that CO2 output and methane output considerably. But instead, we developed as I like to say in California, renewable energy is not a fuel source, it's a religion. It's a religion. And in your faith, you believe in the seen and the unseen, correct? That is what has happened in much of our energy policy. Now let's look over at the automobile and fuels. When I was a CPUC commissioner, I was honored that my colleague and dear friend Mike Peavy gave me the electric vehicle proceeding. The moment I became the assigned commissioner, I converted the name to the alternative fuels proceeding. Why? Because of our self-generation incentive program, which is called SGIP, I visited the many hydrogen projects that were happening at UC Irvine and at the various CSUs and other UC campuses around, and I saw the ability of hydrogen to make a difference in our transportation sector. Also, as chair of the gas committee, I became very familiar with compressed natural gas as a fuel resource. In fact, AT&T converted its fleet of cars to compressed natural gas. So I thought I was making a big, bold statement by converting it to the electric or the alternative fuels proceeding, and I left the commission on December 31st, 2012. The following week, the next assigned commissioner changed it back to the electric vehicle proceeding. You can check your facts there, okay? So the other point I wanted to make is that, as this slide points out, 47%, this is 2022, 47% of our in-state generation is coming from natural gas as we speak. The lights above us is coming from natural gas generation. Every year, our legislature and our governor, who was my mayor in San Francisco, he was on the board of supervisors, he was on the taxi commission. I've worked with him for many years. I think he's a brilliant man. I really do, and I think he can do something really good for the nation. But every year, we decommission natural gas-fired generation in California. And then when the peak period comes, we recommission it. So there's something that's not connecting in these statewide policies that we need to have a broader dialogue about, and that's why Kern County is so dramatically important to this process, because you have all of the resources. I was general counsel of a company in Oklahoma, Oklahoma City, and I remember being at a conference there, and we weren't an energy company, but we were financial services. But I remember the speaker saying that California was the #1, this would have been in the late 80s, early 90s. California was the #1 oil producer in the United States. So let's get back to that NARUC conference that I sat on, the panel. We had the American Petroleum Association who emphasized that the demand for energy is going to only increase, that those flat screens that are being produced by coal-generated manufacturing facilities in China and other parts of the world are going to continue to keep the demand. The electrification of our vehicle fleet are going to continue to increase that demand. But in Texas, I was there with the executive director of the Texas Railroad Commission. Anybody know the history of energy in this country? Before OPEC, the Texas Railroad Commission was the most powerful energy body in the world. It set the price for oil and gas globally. And they always take stabs at me when I'm on panels with them, because I don't know why Texas keeps such an attitude towards California. I love California, I love Texas. I think we can coexist, okay? But Mr. Wei Wang pointed out, who's the executive director of the Texas Railroad Commission, that Texas leads the country in solar, wind, oil, and gas. By the way, Texas also has one of the highest rates of high school graduations. And I think the point I'm making here is that we are very good, but we're not necessarily elite. And I think our elite attitudes about energy and thinking that we are the world leaders is not allowing us to look at other states, other jurisdictions in a way that's embracing the good things that they're doing. So what if Texas is red or purple? That doesn't make a difference to me. I want to make sure that families can afford energy in California. And it's important that we look at those practices to understand. So again, you know, natural gas continues to be the workhorse in this state, but as many, in terms of generation, but like many workhorses, they're often not appreciated for what they bring. I think I was probably the last fossil energy commissioner on the California Public Utilities Commission, and because I embraced all resources and I understood that natural gas is doing more for California to achieve its renewable portfolio standards requirements than any other fuel source, because not only does it provide the firming that our experts spoke of when the wind is not blowing, the sun is not shining, but its lower cost is making it possible for these developers to bring these amazing new technologies to market. As I mentioned, a lot of the things that I was going to discuss have already been discussed, and I'm honored by that. We do know that as we expand our usage of lithium batteries, as we all do, whether we like it or not, there's a lot of human rights concerns that we need to bring to the table and talk vividly about. Some of them by China. As I mentioned to you, I'm heading to APEC tonight. I don't think I'll be anywhere near the Prime Minister. I trust you, but trust me. But, we need to have these open dialogues when we are talking to those who are trying to remove combustible sources and replacing them with sources that are not involving combustion. What I learned at the National Petroleum Council is look at the full life cycle of the source. If I'm driving an electric car in Nevada or in Alabama, states that I love, I'm more of a Sooner than I am a Bama, but but with that being said, we call them coal burners, right? Because most of that electricity is actually coming from coal generation. I believe there's a place for clean coal in our society. I believe the whole notion of carbon capture and sequestration came from our desire to modernize our coal industry. I know that many of the African nations are being forced into energy sources, but they would rather in interim go with coal because they're trying to build their economies as we are. This isn't me just talking. This is me by being on the board of directors of the American Association of Blacks in Energy, having direct contact with many of their energy ministers. Yes, they will go along to get along, and we're all trying to deal with this existential threat. But as a speaker said earlier today, it's not you recognizing climate science or global warming, it's what is the solution? And the solution has become politicized, and it's tragic. Because in closing, I remember in 2007, a senator out of Arizona named John McCain and a senator out of Illinois named Barack Obama were running against each other for the presidency of the United States. Both came out of clean energy agendas. One believed in cap and trade, the other believed in carbon tax. But they both recognized the need for our nation to come together, and it was that very president, Barack Obama, in his 2012 State of the Union address. I was driving in between Los Angeles and San Diego, and that is a deceivingly long drive. Don't be fooled. And I'm listening to the State of the Union address on my rent-a-car radio, and I heard him talk about all of the above. And if I didn't have to keep my hand on the steering wheel, I would have started applauding, because that came right out of the National Petroleum Council study on the prudent development of North America's oil and gas resources. We can do it all together, and if there's any area in the country, and clearly in the state, where it can happen is right here in Kern County. As I've said to my dear friend Kent Holly, I am committed. My firm is committed. All of the organizations that I work with are committed to working with you to tell the story that Californians need to hear, and not allow politicians and appointed officials to demonize certain industries because they feel that is sexy because they heard a Hollywood star, not Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, say that. So with that being said, I want to thank you for this opportunity. I pray, because I am a man of faith, I pray that God continues to bless you with the innovation and the courage to do the right thing, embracing all of your resources. I'm excited about the families who are going to get that paycheck, who are going to put that money down on that mortgage, are going to take their kids for their school clothes, maybe families that have been out of our major economy because of your willingness to stand up for the abundance of resources that you're standing on top of. And I also want to thank God, and I just dropped my pen, and I'm not going to be able to pick it up because last night, Richard Chapman gave me a ride in his Audi TT. If any of you have ever seen an Audi TT, it's about as big as this podium, okay? It was not one of my more elegant moments getting in and out of that car, but I thank Richard for the ride. But I want to ask our dear Lord above, with all the powers and blessings and benefits that he gives us on a daily basis. Imagine right now if you were living in the Gaza, if you were attacked in Israel at a music concert. Imagine if you were in the Congo, if you were in North Yemen, or areas where not only where people don't even have electricity, but they don't know how they're going to eat the following day. I'm asking God to bless you in your work because I'm going back to Minister Lou Rawls. You're groovy people, okay? You really are, and I'm honored to be with you, and I look forward to future gatherings. Thank you very much, and God bless Kern County. Thank you.